Hello and welcome to the channel. Today what we're doing is we're continuing on our How to Play series with part 3 from FJORD Serpents, Vikings at War. And today what we'll be covering is the crew phase. Very important. So when all the maneuvers done, all is said and done, rocks have been hit, the rest of it, we come down to swords, axes and spears, bows and javelins, just as you'd expect. So without further ado, let's get started. Now, before we start directly into the crew phase, there's one thing to note, and that's within the ship phase. If ships do collide, either deliberately or accidentally, the colliding ship, and we'll assume in this example that it's this one, can opt to use one of its crew movements or crew activations to place a grapple token upon the enemy ship. Now, this indicates that they were ready for this boarding action, and it's like a pre-crew phase action, I guess you'd say. And then to represent this, you would just simply turn around, and I've turned around these guys here, these spearmen. You just turn around one of your crew, and then you'd place a red grapple token on the enemy ship and a blue one on your own. Now, these grapple tokens will come into play when you're trying to remove them, really. And obviously, the blue ones are easier to remove than the red ones. For example, a red one would take one entire crew activation to remove, and a blue one would if say you had 3 blue ones on your ship, you could remove all of them with one crew activation. So that's the difference. And this is just something to note before we start the crew phase. So like with the ship phase, in the crew phase, initiative is gained by one player. Now, this was determined right at the beginning of the turn in the wit phase, where one player selected either ship or crew initiative. In this case, we'll say that this ship was the one that initiated, so it might have had the movement phase to be able to do that, movement initiative, and this ship would have the crew initiative. So in this example, you can see that the attacking vessel has had to prime itself to be able to maneuver its ship into position and also grapple. So this has put it at a slight disadvantage when it attacks, which makes a lot of sense. It's had a lot more effort it's had to put into this, while this ship has really just tried to brace and tried to, minimize damage, I guess, from the impact of the enemy vessel. So it's in a position now where it can take the first initiative within the combat, because these guys are quite, organized already and trying to achieve something, which is grappling the enemy ship. Now, the initiative itself works very much like the ship phase, where the player that has the initiative starts with a single activation of any of these crew, and that is alternated from the enemy who doesn't have the initiative, who then selects one of their crew, and you alternate, go back and forth until all crew have moved. The most important thing to remember with this is that ship clusters, and what I mean by a cluster is if, say, these 2 ships are joined here, and maybe you've got another 3 ships or something that are joined somewhere else and they're fighting, you choose the cluster. So wherever the player with the crew initiative goes first, that's the cluster that goes first. And another important thing to note is when you go to the second or third cluster of ships that are fighting, the same player who had initiative goes first. Another important thing to note is the position of each of these crew stands upon the ship. Now, anything positioned at the front of the ship is assumed to be the most offensive or forward-facing unit. So basically what it's trying to do is take the brunt or the assault, or to do an assault against the enemy ship. Anything behind that, in order of where it's placed, is behind that. So say this crew was to get destroyed, then this would be the new front crew. If this crew was to get destroyed, then it wouldn't really matter so much. This is still the front crew. Now, this makes a big difference within gameplay. So each turn at the end phase, you're able to shuffle where these crew are once. So say this berserk here may have got wounded. You may want to shuffle it back a couple of positions at the end of the turn so it doesn't get killed with a second wound. This also means that your missile troops and more delicate troops tend to be towards the back of the ship, which makes a lot of sense too. So remember, this is a visual representation of a Viking ship and the crew involved. It's not deliberately stating where they are exactly on the ship. It's just sort of their offensive order, I guess you'd put it. So your more offensive troops towards the front and your less ones at the back. So now that we're actually at the crew phase and it's started, we've determined who's got initiative. One of these crew can now perform an action. Now, very important decisions are to be made here, and the actual amount of variations you can do here is quite endless. So what I'm going to do is just go through a few options looking at this ship and its complement right now to see what it could do. So for example, we look at the enemy ship and we have a unit of berserks sitting right at the front of the prow. Now, these have a fairly low defense, so now might be a good time to strike them before they can strike me, because they are very powerful on attack and offense. I really don't want to get attacked by them. It could end pretty badly. So an option could be to perform an assault with these guys at the front. And one thing to remember with assaults is each ship can only perform one assault per turn. So what you're really doing is trying to bolster up a ship and get it to the best ability it can be before you perform an assault. But in some situations, you might be advantageous just to take the assault without being braced or without having people backing you up if there's weak troops involved. These do have a weak defense, so this could be an option to assault straight away with these with these swordsmen. But if I wanted to play it a little bit safe, what I could do is I could use one of these spear units instead as my first activation and give something which is called a defense token. Or a brace token. So this brace token I could place here, and simply by using one of these miniatures, I'd turn them around, if that was the case, and I would receive a brace token. What this indicates is that unit is either going to offensively or defensively back up your assaulting unit. And this will add 1 dice to either defense or the assault. And this can be indicated at any time. So say this ship has moved now. What could happen is these guys might decide, oh, well, we're not going to attack with the berserks because they're braced now. Like if I was to attack these guys, they could use that brace token and get the bonus in defense. I might instead try and throw javelins. So if I was going to try and throw javelins, then I might have a chance of taking out one of these units, either their missile unit, the bracing unit, or the actual assaulting unit itself. So that could be an option too. But say we didn't brace over here, another thing that we could do is shoot. And we do have a unit of missile troops over here, so we have the archers. So this is another tactic. You might be like, well, okay, these strong berserkers have grappled with my ship. Let's try and shoot. And this is not a bad option in this situation either, because you have a lot of low defense units on here and none of them are braced. For example, the berserks are fairly low defense. The axemen have no shields. They have armor, but they have no shields. And the javelineers aren't very good as well. They're fairly low defense against missile weapons. So shooting could be another prime option here. So you can see in this game, how you design your crew is so essential. Like it's make or break for what you're trying to achieve in the game. And you can put certain types of crew that work together very well. For example, like the two-handed axemen work very well with the spearmen, because you can use the spearmen to brace them defensively to get through that, low defense that they have and bolster them up. So it's basically all that's indicating is you've got this bunch of shieldsmen and spearmen coming behind them and trying to protect them from other things while they swing massive axes at people's heads. You can also assist with shooting, and this is the token for that. It's an assisted shot. So on the larger ships, you might have 2 missile troops. Now these missile troops one can activate itself to assist the other, which gives you an extra dice for a single attack. Now, when in this game, we'll go through the combat section as a separate thing because it's a big section in itself. But in the combat thing, what you're doing is you're trying to find that target number. Now, we determine that in the wit phase, the first phase of this turn, what the wit number was. So that's what you're always aiming to get. So the more dice you have, the more chance you have of rolling that number, if that makes sense. Other actions that crew may perform is they can remove grapple tokens. So in this circumstance, maybe most of these guys, I'd probably use this at the end of phases or end of the turn, really, because you want to see what's going on. So I can either add another grapple token. So I might not want to shoot this turn. I might want to add another grapple token, which would mean I'd put another grapple token on the enemy ship and mine. Or if I'm over this side and I've got one more crew left who hasn't done anything, I could take away this grapple token. And what that would do then is detach the ships for the end turn, which means they would drift independently because they're not bound together anymore. And this is a perfect opportunity to try and escape, or to try to get a better position, or to try again for another ram, whatever you're trying to do. So removing grapple tokens is another thing that you can do within the game. Another thing that a crew can do, and I'm just going to take these away as an example. So if we take these guys and we say they're dead, right? And this ship has a full complement of crew. Now, we're just going to, basically determine that these would have killed these last turn. So this might be the next turn, right? And they're still grappled together, and the fighting's going well for this ship. Now, what I can do if I have any activations left here, I can move a crew from here for their activation onto the enemy ship. Now, how this is determined is if a ship ever gets to its half crew complement. So basically, if you're behind the mast is the best way to put it, because at the end of each turn, what we do is we shuffle all these troops down until they're at the back of the ship. And that leaves 2 positions vacant at the front here. So an example of what I could do here is, say the Berserks just murdered everyone and these guys have already activated and shot. I could take this unit of axemen right here and I could take them and put them onto the enemy ship. Now how I do that is I indicate by putting them basically facing the enemy and at the back, just like it was its own ship. So I'm at the back, or at the front, but the back to me, and they are now on the enemy ship. Now they can't assault this turn, but what happens is next turn, say this was how it ended up next turn, this guy would be shuffled back. And now what I can do now is I have the opportunity of doing 2 assaults upon the enemy ship in this turn, because this is now treated as its own ship for these guys. So these guys could do an assault and these guys could do an assault with the usual backup and things you want. And because there's an extra slot there, I could actually move another crew member over and it's just treated as its own ship again for these guys. So when all of these crew are dead, I actually control the ship. And having 1 crew member upon that ship means that I own it and I can move it as normal and just treat it as my own vessel, which is really cool too. It's a pretty fun aspect of the game, is to steal people's ships, I guess you'd say. Now, each of these individual crew guys have different skills and abilities themselves. They have different attack dice, defense dice, all of the things that make up a unit. But what we won't be covering that in this, because I'm just going through the turn phases themselves. When we get to combat and when we get to crew and the complement of them, we'll go through individually what each of these has. Now, we're back to this ship over here, the Berserks having had their second action. We're going to choose to shoot. And that's going to be interesting. So what we do first is we roll a d4. So we just ignore a 5 and a 6. And we roll. So we roll that there, and we find that we get a 1. So that's just to determine who is hit, right? So that means the Berserkers have been hit, which is very powerful. That means they're already wounded, and now I have missile units which have shot at them and hit them. So now we need to determine the success of that shot. So we go back to our target number. Bowmen have 2 dice when they're not assisted, and the Berserks still only have a 1 defense. We're aiming for 6s, and we get 2 5s. That's very powerful. So that's 2 minor wounds upon these Berserks. They only have 1 dice to defend this. And they roll a 4, which is a fail. So this is bad for them. Now, these wounds, they can individually try and negate, which they don't with their Fearless. So what's happened now is these Berserks have suffered a wound. I know both of them succeeded, but what happens is that's an automatic death. If you receive 2 wounds within a turn. They already have a wound, so that puts it to 2, which kills them outright. So they've been wounded by the swordsman, and then they get shot and killed by the bowman. Probably a pretty common scenario back in the day. Okay, that brings action back to this ship, and what they are deciding to do is to shoot back with their javelins. So similar to the previous, we just ignore 5 6s to see we hit, so we ignore that one, and we get 3. So these spearmen here, who haven't activated yet, are the target of the Javelineers, who get 2 dice versus the spearmen's 2 dice in defense, because they are a shield unit. Okay, so it's a total miss, so we don't even need to roll it. So the Javelineers miss, and we turn them around. Okay, so back to action of this ship. Now, they're looking pretty good, and I think what's going to happen is, I have a sneaking suspicion if I was this ship, I might try and remove my own token so I can escape. So what these guys over here decide is to take the offense, because they've killed their main Berserk unit now, and so they put a blue token on themselves and a red grapple token on these guys as their final action, and secure the enemy ship so it can't get away. And that brings us back to here with the last action. And you can see here these axemen don't have much option because the berserks have just been cut down and shot before them, and they're kind of staying back. They've been pushed back to the mast of the ship basically to see them die, and now they're getting ready to re-establish themselves for the next turn. So they decide to remove their own grapple tokens. So they remove this token off to try and free it. But obviously, for next turn, they're still going to have a grapple token placed upon them, so the ships won't drift apart. And that will complete this one round of combat, which I just did as an example to show you how this game works.